A black girl beggar asked the millionaire, "Can I eat with you, Daddy?" His answer surprises you. The manager of Louis Bernardin restaurant grabbed the child's arm with unnecessary force. "I already told you people like you aren't allowed in here. Get out before I call security." The 7-year-old girl backed away, but her determined eyes remained fixed on the black man in the impeccable suit sitting alone at the corner table. "Please, sir," she whispered, "can I eat with you, Daddy?" The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye in the elegant Manhattan establishment turned to the unlikely scene. A barefoot child begging for food from the restaurant's only black customer, Michael Washington, 42, CEO of one of the country's largest technology companies, watched the situation with a calmness that disconcerted even the arrogant manager. It was the third time that month he had witnessed racial discrimination at that same restaurant. But this time, something different shone in his eyes. "Of course you can, little one," Michael replied firmly, completely ignoring the scandalized murmurs from nearby tables. "Sit down here." The manager, Thomas Fletcher, paled. "Mr. Washington, with all due respect, but this child clearly does not belong here. We have standards to uphold." Michael smiled slightly, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Discreetly, he slid his finger across his cell phone screen, activating the recorder. "Standards. Kind of?" "Standards exactly, Mr. Fletcher." The question hung in the air, laden with meaning. Michael had been frequenting that restaurant for years, always facing suspicious glances, deliberately slow service, and whispered comments. But he had never reacted. He had never complained. Everyone thought he simply accepted the humiliating treatment. How wrong they were. Little Aisha, her big eyes full of hope, sat down in the chair Michael had pulled out for her. "Thank you, Daddy," she murmured. Something in the way she said the word made Michael's heart ache. "You're welcome, sweetheart," he replied, his eyes never leaving Fletcher's. "After all, every child deserves a decent meal, doesn't he, Mr. Fletcher?" The manager looked nervously at the other customers, all white, all clearly uncomfortable with the girl's presence. A gray-haired lady made a visible expression of disgust. A middle-aged couple discreetly asked to change tables. Michael watched. Every reaction, memorized every face, every whispered comment. His mind was already working out the details of a plan that had been brewing for months. A plan that would transform this daily humiliation into something much more powerful. "Mr. Washington," Fletcher tried again, his voice now lower, but equally venomous. "Surely you understand that we need to maintain a certain clientele. This child is clearly out of her element here." Then Michael did something unexpected. Instead of getting up and leaving as Fletcher expected, he picked up the menu and offered it to Aisha. "What would you like to eat, sweetheart? You can choose anything." The girl's eyes widened as she saw the elaborate dishes and astronomical prices. "Can I really choose anything?" Michael confirmed, his voice loud enough for the entire section to hear. After all, a princess deserves the best, doesn't she? While everyone watched the scene with a mixture of disbelief and barely concealed indignation, Michael kept his expression calm. But inside, every humiliation he had suffered in that place over the years fueled something much greater. What none of them knew was that Michael Washington wasn't just another wealthy customer tolerating discrimination. He was the new owner of the building that housed Lou Bernardin, and the board meeting was scheduled for the following week. If this story of prejudice and reversal touched your heart, be sure to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple moment of humiliation become the catalyst for justice that no one would ever forget. Fletcher approached the table with deliberately slow steps, every movement calculated to intimidate. "Mr. Washington, I appreciate your generosity, but this child has no reservation. Our establishment operates under strict admission policies." Michael continued cutting his meat with surgical precision without looking up. "Interesting policies. Could you elaborate on those admission criteria, Mr. Fletcher? Aisha nervously watched the silent standoff, her small hands trembling slightly as she held the menu. She had learned on the streets to recognize when adults were about to explode in anger, and the tension in the air was palpable. Well, Fletcher cleared his throat, choosing each word carefully. We try to maintain an environment suitable for our traditional clientele. People who understand our values and standards of behavior. At the next table, socialite Margaret Thornfield whispered loudly enough to be heard. Frankly, we don't pay these prices to dine next to these people. It's embarrassing. Her husband, banker Richard Thornfield, discreetly signaled to Fletcher, "Manager, surely you can resolve this situation quickly. We have a reputation to consider." Michael finally looked up, meeting Fletcher's gaze with disconcerting, calm reputation. Interesting word. Discreetly, he adjusted his cell phone to better capture the audio of the conversation. "Tell me, Mr. Fletcher, how long have you worked at this establishment?" 15 years, Fletcher replied with ill-concealed pride. "I've built my career ensuring that Le Bernardin maintains its exclusive status." What Fletcher didn't know was that Michael had been frequenting that restaurant for 4 years straight. For years of observing, documenting, collecting evidence of a systematic pattern of discrimination. Every whispered comment, every deliberately slow service for black customers, every look of contempt had been carefully cataloged in his analytical mind. "Aisha," Michael said gently to the girl, "have you chosen what you'd like to eat?" "Can I really choose anything?" she asked again, still incredulous. "Anything?" Michael confirmed, noticing how Fletcher clenched his fists. "Then I'll have the golden fish with the special potatoes," Aisha said, pointing to the most expensive dish on the menu. Fletcher couldn't hide a sigh of exasperation. "Mr. Washington, I must insist that what?" Michael interrupted, his voice remaining calm, but carrying an authority that made Fletcher instinctively retreat. "That a child can't have dinner in a restaurant? That I don't deserve the same respect as any other customer?" The question echoed around the section, creating an uncomfortable silence. Other customers began to stare openly, some clearly embarrassed. By the scene unfolding before them, Fletcher glanced around quickly, realizing that the situation was spiraling out of his control. It's not a question of respect, but of appropriateness. This child clearly does not have the resources to frequent an establishment of this caliber. It was then that Michael smiled for the first time since he had arrived. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had just been handed exactly the ammunition he needed. "Resources," Michael repeated, savoring the word. "Interesting perspective." He discreetly took out his wallet and removed a black credit card with no limit. "Will this card be sufficient to cover our dinner?" Fletcher glanced at the exclusive card, immediately recognizing the status it represented. "Of course, sir, but then there's no problem with resources," Michael cut him off. "Unless you're suggesting some other criteria for determining who can and cannot dine here." The manager was visibly sweating now. He knew he had stepped into dangerous territory, but deep-seated prejudice prevented him from backing down completely. "It's simply a matter of maintaining the proper atmosphere for all of our customers." Margaret Thornfield decided to intervene. Directly, "Excuse me, but we pay premium prices precisely to avoid this situation. There are more appropriate places for this kind of charity." Michael turned slowly to face her. "Charity? Madam, are you suggesting that a child dining in a restaurant constitutes charity?" "Don't be naive," she replied dismissively. "We all know what this is. It's a stage performance, a show of pity. This child clearly does not belong here." Aisha shrank into her chair, the words hurting more than any hunger ever had. Michael noticed her reaction, and something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "Aisha," he said softly, "you are a princess. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." The girl smiled shyly, but Margaret Thornfield let out a sarcastic laugh. Princess, please, be realistic. It was at that moment that Michael made a decision that would change not only that night, but the fate of everyone present. Discreetly, he sent a text message to his personal assistant. Execute Operation Cleanup. All evidence. Now, what none of them knew was that Michael Washington wasn't just a client who had been tolerating discrimination for years. He was a born strategist who had turned every humiliation into fuel for something much greater. And the extraordinary board meeting, scheduled for Monday, would not be just about contract renewals. It would be about a complete change in management. Every whispered insult, every derogatory comment they thought he simply swallowed in silence had been documented, recorded, cataloged. And now, as Margaret Thornfield and Fletcher continued to dig their own graves with every poisonous word, Michael maintained his serene expression, because those who know true power know that it grows precisely in silence. Feeding on the underestimation of fools who confuse patience with weakness. The waiter brought the dish Aisha had ordered with forced elegance, clearly instructed by Fletcher to keep up appearances. The golden fish glistened under the restaurant lighting, accompanied by perfectly brown potatoes and a sauce that cost more than many families spent on food for an entire week. "Thank you," Aisha murmured, her eyes widening at the artistic presentation of the dish. She had never seen food prepared in this way. It's like an edible work of art. Michael watched the girl's reaction with genuine tenderness, but his ears remained alert to the whispered conversations going on around him. Margaret Thornfield couldn't hide her growing indignation. "Richard," she hissed at her husband, "this is absolutely ridiculous. We pay $4,000 a month just to dine here, so we don't have to deal with these situations." Her husband discreetly motioned to Fletcher, who approached the couple's table with exaggerated deference. "Mr. and Mrs. Thornfield, how can I help you?" "This situation is becoming intolerable," Margaret said, gesturing toward Michael and Aisha. "Surely there are measures that can be taken to restore the proper atmosphere." Fletcher glanced nervously at Michael, who continued to cut his meat with surgical precision, seemingly oblivious to the conspiracy unfolding a few feet away. But every word was being recorded with crystal clarity by the discreet device he had activated. "I understand your concerns perfectly," Fletcher replied in a low voice. "We'll find a way to resolve this quickly." It was at that moment that Michael's phone vibrated with a call. The name that appeared on the screen made his lips curve into an almost imperceptible smile. David Chen, lawyer. "Excuse me," Michael said to Aisha, answering the call. "David, Michael, I got your message about Operation Cleanup." The lawyer's voice was professional, but laden with barely contained satisfaction. "I have excellent news. I got all the necessary authorizations for Monday." "Perfect," Michael replied, keeping his tone casual. "What about the other matter we discussed?" "Oh, you mean the discrimination records we've compiled over the last 4 years? Everything's documented, all the recordings transcribed, all the witnesses contacted. We have a watertight case." Michael glanced discreetly in Fletcher's direction, who was now talking animatedly with another employee, probably planning a more aggressive way to remove him from the restaurant. "Excellent work, David. We'll talk on Monday." Aisha, who had watched the call with childlike curiosity, asked, "Was it important?" "Very important, little one," Michael replied, putting away his phone. "Sometimes when people treat us badly, we need to make sure there are consequences for their actions." The girl nodded seriously beyond her years. "My grandmother always said that you reap what you sow." The child's simple wisdom struck Michael deeply. Your grandmother was very wise. Meanwhile, Fletcher had returned to the Thornfield table with a plan. "We checked, and unfortunately, there was a mistake with Mr. Washington's reservation for tonight. We're going to have to ask them to leave." Margaret smiled with malicious satisfaction. Finally, a little efficiency. What none of them knew was that every word was being captured not only by Michael's recorder, but also by the security cameras he had discreetly installed in the establishment 3 months earlier. When he officially took ownership of the building, Fletcher approached Michael's table with determined steps. "Mr. Washington, I'm sorry to inform you that there has been a mistake with your reservation. We're going to have to ask you to leave immediately." Michael looked up slowly, meeting the manager's gaze with disconcerting calm. Mistake with the reservation. Interesting. He took out his cell phone and opened the restaurant app, clearly showing the reservation confirmation. "Here's my confirmation. Table 42, 8 p.m., confirmed 3 days ago." Fletcher looked at the screen with visible nervousness. "Well, even so. We have special protocols for certain situations." "Special protocols," Michael repeated, savoring each word. "Could you document those protocols in writing, Mr. Fletcher?" "For my personal records," the question caught the manager completely off guard. "Document? I don't see the need." "Of course you do," Michael interrupted, his voice still calm, but carrying an authority that made Fletcher instinctively take a step back. After all, if there are official protocols, they must surely be documented somewhere, mustn't they? Aisha, sensing the growing tension, whispered, "Are we in trouble?" "No, honey," Michael replied, without taking his eyes off Fletcher. "We're exactly where we need to be." Margaret Thornfield, losing patience with the length of the negotiation, rose from her table and walked directly over to them. "Look here," she said, addressing Michael directly. "We all know what's going on here. You brought this child here to cause a scene, to make us feel guilty, but we won't accept this kind of emotional blackmail." Michael finally stood up, his imposing height causing Margaret to recoil slightly. "Emotional blackmail? Madam, all I did was have dinner with a child. If that bothers you so much, perhaps the problem isn't with us." "Don't be ridiculous," she retorted. "This pathetic charade isn't fooling anyone. That child is obviously not yours." It was then that Michael smiled for the second time that evening. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had just been handed the ammunition he needed for the final blow. "You're right," he said calmly. "Aisha is not my biological daughter." He paused dramatically. "She is my adopted daughter. We finalized the legal process last week." The silence that followed was absolute. Margaret turned pale, realizing she had just publicly attacked a legitimate family. Fletcher seemed to be mentally calculating how many legal protocols he had violated. Michael continued, his voice now carrying a coldness that caused several customers at nearby tables to stop their conversations to listen. "And I must say that this has been a very educational experience for both of us. Aisha is learning about different types of people in the world. Some who judge by character, others who judge by skin color or appearance." He picked up his phone again, this time opening a different app. "It's been educational for me as well. For example, I've learned that this establishment has a 62% lower black customer retention rate than the national average. Curious statistics for a restaurant that charges premium prices for exclusivity." Fletcher was visibly sweating now. "Mr. Washington, if there has been some misunderstanding. Michael raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Fletcher, the only misunderstanding here is the assumption that my experiences at this restaurant have gone unnoticed." Aisha, who had finished her meal, watched the unfolding drama with fascination. She was smart enough to realize that something important was happening, even if she didn't fully understand the adult nuances of the situation. "Daddy," she whispered, trying out the word for the first time in public. "Can I have dessert?" The word daddy echoed through the section like thunder. Several people choked on their drinks. Margaret Thornfield looked as if she were about to faint. "Of course you can, Princess," Michael replied, his voice softening instantly as he spoke to the little girl. "Anything you want." He then turned to Fletcher, who was clearly in a state of panic. By the way, Mr. Fletcher, Monday will be a very interesting day at Lou Bernardine. There will be some significant administrative changes. Fletcher frowned, confused. Administrative changes. Michael smiled again. Oh, don't worry. I'm sure it will be communicated through the appropriate channels. What Fletcher and Margaret didn't know was that David Chen wasn't just Michael's personal lawyer. He was also the lead legal representative for Washington Tech Holdings, the parent company that had quietly acquired ownership of the Lou Bernardine building 3 months earlier. And the extraordinary board meeting scheduled for Monday wasn't about contract renewals. It was about implementing new diversity and inclusion policies, mandatory training for all employees on racial discrimination, and a complete management shakeup that would transform La Bernardine into Manhattan's first truly inclusive fine dining restaurant, as Aisha savored her vanilla ice cream with chocolate sauce. Michael discreetly observed every face around him. Fletcher was too nervous to hide his panic. Margaret was in shock from having attacked a royal family. The other customers whispered speculations about who this man really was, who remained so calm in the face of such hostility. Everyone believed they were witnessing a simple racial conflict in an exclusive restaurant. In reality, they were witnessing the final moments of an era of institutionalized discrimination that was about to come to a spectacular end. Because those who truly know power know that it grows in silence, feeding on the underestimation of those who confuse strategic patience with weakness until the moment when true strength reveals itself in a way that completely rewrites all the rules of the game, while Aisha savored her dessert with the innocence of a child who finally felt safe. Michael received a notification on his phone. It was a message from David Chen. Operation Cleanup complete. Official documents ready for delivery. Local media contacted. You have the green light. Michael smiled discreetly and put his phone away. It was 9:45 p.m. The perfect moment had arrived. Mr. Fletcher, Michael called, his voice cutting through the nervous chatter that had settled in the restaurant. Could you gather your entire team, please? I have an important announcement to make. Actually, Michael rose slowly, his imposing presence causing several conversations to cease. You're right. This isn't your corporate headquarters. It's my property. Absolute silence filled the room. Margaret Thornfield, who had returned to her table after the previous confrontation, turned visibly pale. What did he say? Michael removed an elegant folder from his executive briefcase, which had remained discreetly beside his chair throughout the evening. Washington Tech Holdings officially acquired this building 3 months ago. I am the owner of Lou Bernardine. Fletcher stumbled over his words. That's impossible. Our lease is with Morrison and Associates, which was acquired by my holding company. Michael added with surgical calm. All contracts were automatically transferred, including your employment contract, Mr. Fletcher. The revelation hit the refined atmosphere like a bomb. Other customers began to whisper anxiously, some already asking for their bills so they could leave quickly. Margaret Thornfield stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. You can't just. Her voice died when Michael opened the briefcase and took out a stack of official documents. I can, and I already have, Michael replied, distributing copies of the documents on the nearby tables. Deed of ownership, transfer certificate, new management incorporation documents. All duly registered and authenticated. Fletcher took one of the documents with trembling hands, his eyes quickly scanning the lines that confirmed his worst nightmares. But why weren't we informed? Michael raised an eyebrow. Why should you be? The law does not require prior notification to employees about a change in ownership. Only continuity of existing contracts. He paused dramatically. Which, incidentally, are being terminated as of Monday. The final bomb had been detonated. Fletcher staggered backward, leaning against the back of a chair. Terminated. All contracts. Not all of them, Michael corrected with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Only those of employees who have demonstrated systematic patterns of racial discrimination against customers. It was then that he took out his phone and activated a recording. Fletcher's own voice echoed through the silent restaurant. It's simply a matter of maintaining a certain clientele. This child is clearly out of his element here. Margaret Thornfield turned white as a sheet. The recording continued, capturing her own venomous voice. We don't pay these prices to dine next to these people. It's embarrassing. For years, Michael said calmly as the recording played more incriminating excerpts. For years of frequenting this establishment, carefully documenting every incident of racial discrimination, every whispered comment, every deliberately slow service, every look of contempt. Fletcher was in a complete panic now. Mr. Washington, please, if there has been a misunderstanding. Michael interrupted, pulling out another device. David, you can come in now. The front door opened, and David Chen entered, accompanied by 2 bailiffs and a reporter from the local television network. The reporter already had her camera rolling, capturing every second of the revelation. Good evening, David said professionally. I am David Chen, legal representative for Washington Tech Holdings. I am here to deliver official notices of contract termination due to documented racial discrimination. Margaret Thornfield tried one last, desperate gambit. This is a setup, a framed job to incriminate us. Michael turned to her with disconcerting calm. Mrs. Thornfield, the only staging here was pretending for years that I tolerated discrimination in order to keep the peace. Every word you've said tonight has been recorded in high definition, including your public attack on a legitimate, family-based, purely on racial prejudice. The reporter stepped forward with her microphone. Mr. Washington, can you tell us about your decision to acquire this establishment? Michael adjusted his tie, instantly transforming into the polished executive he had always been. La Bernardine has the potential to be truly exceptional. Unfortunately, under previous management, developed an institutional culture of discrimination that is unacceptable in this day and age. Fletcher attempted a pathetic last-ditch defense. Sir, I have always treated you with the utmost respect. Mr. Fletcher, Michael interrupted, his voice carrying an authority that made the man instinctively retreat. I have recordings of 16 different occasions where you demonstrated clear racial bias against black customers. 16 times where service was deliberately substandard, where tables were forgotten, where reservations mysteriously disappeared from the system. David Chen approached Fletcher with an official envelope. Notice of termination for cause. Racial discrimination is a federal crime, Mr. Fletcher. The company is considering additional legal action. Fletcher opened the envelope with visibly shaking hands. Inside, in addition to the termination notice, were copies of all the transcribed recordings, photographs of documented incidents, and a letter detailing for years of systematic discrimination. My career, Fletcher muttered, reality finally penetrating his arrogance. 15 years at this restaurant. 15 years perpetuating prejudice, Michael corrected coldly. 15 years making customers feel inferior based on the color of their skin. That ends today. Margaret Thornfield tried to slip away discreetly, but the reporter intercepted her. Mrs. Thornfield, how do you respond to the accusations that you verbally attacked a family because of racial prejudice? 'Twas a misunderstanding, she stammered, realizing that her words were being broadcast live. There is no prejudice whatsoever. Michael activated another recording on his phone. Margaret's own voice echoed clearly. This pathetic charade isn't fooling anyone. That child is obviously not your daughter. Don't be ridiculous. We all know what this is. A setup, a pity show. Margaret's face contorted in despair. Turn off that camera. I didn't authorize this. "We're in a public space," the reporter replied. "Professionally. And this is a matter of public interest regarding racial discrimination in elite establishments." As chaos unfolded around her, Aisha watched with wide eyes, trying to process the adult nuances of the situation. "Dad," she whispered, "you really own this place." Michael knelt down beside her chair, his expression softening instantly. "Yes, little one. And you know what that means?" "What?" "It means that this place will now be a place where all children of all colors will always be welcome," Michael explained gently. "Where no one will ever be judged by their appearance, but by their heart." Aisha smiled radiantly, like a real princess. Just like a real princess. David Chen approached discreetly. "Michael, the transfer documents are ready. The new management takes over on Monday, and the media is interested in a more extensive interview about your inclusion policies." Michael nodded, standing up. He turned to face Fletcher one last time. "Mr. Fletcher, for years you believed that tolerance was weakness. That silence meant acceptance. Today you have discovered that strategic patience is a form of power that your limited mind could never comprehend." Fletcher just stared at him, devastated, realizing that his entire career had been built on a foundation of prejudice that had finally crumbled. Starting Monday, Michael announced to the entire restaurant, Le Bernardin will implement new diversity and inclusion policies. There will be mandatory training on racial discrimination for all employees, and we will establish a scholarship program for young people from underserved communities who are interested in gastronomy. The reporter smiled, realizing she had a much bigger story than she had imagined. "Mr. Washington, that's really inspiring. A complete transformation of an elite establishment." "Not a transformation," Michael corrected, picking up Aisha. "Evolution. Because true excellence has never been about excluding people. It's always been about including the best, regardless of where they come from." As they walked toward the exit, under the flash of cameras and the admiring murmurs of the few remaining customers, Fletcher stood in the middle of the empty restaurant, clutching his termination notice like a man who had just realized he had spent 15 years on the wrong side of history. Margaret Thornfield had fled out the back, but her prejudiced words were already circulating on social media, where the video of the confrontation was going viral by the minute. At the door, Michael paused and turned back one last time. "Mr. Fletcher, one last thing. That reservation that was mysteriously mistaken today, it was for two people from the beginning. I always knew I would bring my daughter to dinner with me." The final revelation hit Fletcher like a blow. Michael had planned everything from the beginning. The hungry child was his adopted daughter. The dinner was a carefully orchestrated trap, and he had fallen right into it, revealing his true nature in front of cameras and recorders. As the limousine drove away with Michael and Aisha, Le Bernardin fell into a deathly silence. On Monday, when the doors opened again, it would be under completely new management. A management that would prove that true excellence comes from inclusion, not exclusion. And somewhere in Manhattan, Margaret Thornfield watched on her cell phone as the video of her prejudiced comments surpassed 1 million views. Realizing that her social reputation had been destroyed in a single night by her own arrogance,